Welcome back to the program. It is me, Todd, and this is Andy. Uh, and we are the co hosts of the Writer's Block, of course. Um, it is your only destination for anything writers related or writing related in particular. Um, you can find us on YouTube, uh, Spotify, other places that I can't remember because I have terrible memory. Um, Follow us on Twitter, both
Twitter.
individually and on our new uh, Twitter thing. Would you like to? What is the Twitter at handle?
It's called the Writers BLO1 and then the letter or the number 10 because you couldn't just use the writer's block. They had to switch it.
Oof. Well, you can find us there, folks, and don't forget to follow us on our other Twitter accounts, where we can also, you know, give you more information about not just this awesome podcast, but our own works, which are on our websites and so forth and all that stuff. So, anyways, getting back to business. Last week, we were talking about self-publishing. We were talking about a lot of things, but one of the things we talked about was self-publishing. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about one important component of self-publishing, and that is self-marketing. So if you go the route of Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing software, you have to reach out to those potential customers on your own. And you could buy search engine optimizations. You can pay people to market your book, but that those decisions are in your hands. Like Amazon itself won't publicize your book. They won't they won't throw ads up for it. These are all things that you have to do yourself. So it's important to know that if you go that route, it's important to have a strong social media presence. Yeah, and then also connections. Networking would be a big help, not just locally, but across not just the country, but across the world. There are plenty of independent authors all across Earth. So follow each other and retweet each other's work, and that'll slowly but surely can get your stuff out. But it'll take some time, but it does take a lot of self-marketing. So that's just for like self-publishing on KDP. But when you're doing your work on Wix, when you publish your short stories, what kind of process do you use to?
So the way I do it is, well, after I publish it, I have the link in my my Instagram account and my Twitter. So and then I make an Instagram story so people can only see it for like 24 hours that I, posted a new, story on my website. And then they have to go to my profile to click on the link to get to that story. They don't the link doesn't unfortunately work by clicking on the little post that I have. And then I make a post on Facebook with the link, and then LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn too. I do the same thing with, and then put the link on there. But if people say miss the 24-hour Instagram story or the post from Facebook or LinkedIn, you can go to my profile and click on it there. But I'm not the best at self-promoting because I feel like I'm bothering people, to be honest with you, by constantly promoting my work. Like, oh, here it is, here it is, here it is. But people say, I've asked others, and I'm like, would it get annoying if it's like once or twice a week? And they're like, no, because you're not throwing it down or shoving it down our throats. It's you're trying to help yourself out. Like, it would be if it was every day for like every hour, then it would be different. But
I will say, just a little head on to that note, when I initially started doing my self-publishing and self-marketing, I followed a whole bunch of independent authors, and most of them followed me back. But there are some who will post multiple times a day, and those people, like, my feed would just be something I'm interested in, and then 10 or so tweets of them self-promoting. And I get it, but I ended up unfollowing because, or I think you can also mute people, but it kind of defeats the purpose of networking in a way. And that's just a personal thing. I mean, because like my Twitter it's my self-publish, it's my self-marketing uh, structure, but it's also like my own personal usage. Like I use it for other things, like following what's going on in the news or whatever. So that's just me. But yeah,
No, I have someone who like self promotes their books like almost every single day, and sometimes they'll either like you don't even know if it's like them or if it's spam, but they'll DM you on Twitter and be like, "Oh, click here and you can get a free audio or your free like Kindle link or whatever."
I feel
And
like
you're like, "Is it automated or is it actually somebody?"
even once a day probably isn't that bad. This particular person I'm talking about, it was like, this might sound hyperbolic, but it was almost 30 times a day. It would just be mass clusters of retweets. And I think it was all just, because I think you can schedule tweets to come out. And just, I think they would just do that every single day, just flood the feed. And it was just a bit much. But I mean, I can see doing it at least several times a week, especially if you have multiple projects you're putting out. Like, every day of the week, you could promote a different story, and kind of rotate through that as you get newer stories.
Mhm.
But
Or you can just like, I know the last time I did it more than once, I did like the first day I published my new story, and then I waited 3 days and then I re-promoted it again, but then I made another post like right after, like um showing all the different stories so people can go back and read those as well, and that worked really well. I haven't done that in probably almost a month now, but it worked that one time. So it's like you question if you should just do like the whole website once or twice a week, or you should wait until you have a new story and then do both at the same time.
yeah, I guess it's a good question, because like the way that you do it, it sounds like you just put a post out whenever you've got new content, and that might result in readers clicking on it more often because they know it's something new, as opposed to just uh, you know uh, the same thing as that they've already read. Um, I think either one works though. If you could, I honestly, I'm terrible at self marketing. I think I've tweeted about my books a couple times, but I take a pretty big L on that one, and it's one of those things where it's a big responsibility that, like, if you want to see sales and if you want to see movement and traffic on your stories, you have to do the effort. You have to put in the work. And now, usually by that point in the process, I kind of check out a little bit. Like, I've already, like, for me, like, I know you write mostly short stories, but for me, like, I've put out, like, I'll write, this 70,000 page book, or the 70,000 word book, or this 50,000 word book. And that is a process. And then the marketing part is just as important, but I'm, burn out by that point, or, whatever. But
It makes sense why actual like authors have managers, or
oh yeah,
because you're burnt out. Because I even know, like, after writing my short story, it's only maybe 5 to 10 pages if I'm lucky. But I'm still like, after the fact, I sit back, I'm like, I don't want to promote this again. People could
yeah,
see it for 24 hours and then, or for a little while, and then that's it. But I'm the same way. It's like after that fact, I'm like, I don't want to. I'm bad at it.
yeah. It's probably worth taking marketing courses on, like, what's it, Skillshare or something like that, just to have a better understanding of little, like, things that you can do that look little tiny things that might have a much larger impact than just tweeting out something, or uh, posting out making a post about something. There's so much more to it than just social media campaigns. Like, there's like the search engine optimizations. You can have your ads for your website popping up on Google searches and stuff like that. But that is a lot more work. But
And most of the time it costs actual
yeah,
money. Like, I do the bare minimum, so it's because it's free, because I could have other people fix my website in like help publish it and promote it more, but it's going to cost you a monthly fee of like, I don't even know.
Oh yeah.
Like, no, thank you.
Yeah, because everyone wants a cut,
Mhm.
But speaking of cuts, let's talk about, I guess, perspectives. What do we want to talk about? Perspectives, like first person, third person, whatever, or epilogues and prologues. Let's talk about
We
that
can do
prologue.
okay, prologue and epilogues, and then just endings in general, because it all
Yeah,
ties in together.
yeah. I mean, it has nothing to do with cuts, but I like to make that little breakaway. But so do you write prologue? See, you're working on a novel right now, and you wrote a prologue originally, right?
Yeah, I still have it. I'm still contemplating whether or not to publish it like on my website as like a way to get people excited about my novel if it ever, appears in, book format. And but also like a way of like trying to see if it works or fits within my novel. Because some books, the book I'm reading now just starts with a chapter.
Mhm.
And then it's just chapter one, and it was kind of like an epilogue. Like it kind of explained what the main characters were, like what happened to these two main characters, and then chapter two was like back, like in set in present day. So you could do it that way too. But this is like the first prologue that I've ever really written. I don't know if you've ever written one. I know you kind of touched on it last week, but
Mhm. So I don't actually have prologues or epilogues in any of my books. I've used them in the past for short stories that I wrote just on my own, but traditionally I kind of like I think a lot of times the last chapter of my book really could be an epilogue because not always, but some of my books the last chapter will take place sometime in the future, and it shows uh sometimes it'll show the extent of the the climax of the book, what uh ended up happening to certain characters or where are they now, and um but not always. Like my first book, the one Fairly Human, uh that one could have used an epilogue probably, but it just right after the final chapter it just kind of cuts off, and it's more of a cliffhanger actually. But I wrote a little tiny short story that sort of continued off of that, which in a way that's an epilogue, a really long epilogue, I guess. But yeah, I've never really used them though. I don't know how to fit them in properly. I feel like because usually you can set up, like if you can set up the story or like what you could use a prologue as in the first chapter, then I guess my question would be like, do you really need one? But then the certain stories, like a crime story, I feel like you could use a prologue to set up the actual crime or the actual situation from a like third person perspective, and in that way it would work. I think it's just the stuff that I write or the genres that I write generally don't they don't require a prologue or an epilogue, and they just don't really fit in too well there. But
and I think I've only ever written one epilogue, and it was in one of my short stories, and it was formatted as like a newspaper article,
mm,
like the head, like the title of the article, and then it was like a 4 sentence like blip. It was like in the Tri-County Blotter. That was like an old newspaper section from my hometown where you could go read who got arrested or whatnot or what was happening. And so that's what I kind of like formatted it as. But I've never written anything like that before.
so I guess that now that I think about it, my two recent books, the first chapter, technically, my first and last chapter, they're technically not styled as a prologue or an epilogue, or they're not. It doesn't say it in the text, but they really are. Now that I think about it, they're both journal entries. The main character will write a journal entry that kind of expresses what's going on with them at the moment and kind of in their environment, their surroundings, and that will lead into the overall story. And then the very last chapter is a final journal entry where they talk about uh, to an extent like the changes that have happened and where they are mentally, the end of the journey, I guess you could say. I never, I mean, they're basically a prologue and epilogue, but I never actually, it's just chapter one and chapter, last chapter.
Whatever. Yeah. I also used too, like page breaks. to like indicate a different section of the like my short story. There was one where I used my novel characters. I think it was my introduction to the novel characters, and I used page breaks to like figure out the different like what was going on in between. So kind of like chapters, but could you use page breaks, like a page break before or in between, or like the beginning of chapter one? Could you consider that a prologue too? Or would like that be considered a prologue if you start at chapter one? And then I always like to use like paragraphs italicized if I'm going to do a page break to introduce something, and then I do 3 dots or a line, and then I start my actual story.
Yeah, you could do
Sometimes
that.
2.
So
And
you're
then the
saying
same
like,
thing with an epilogue, I guess, the ending of the story. So the italicized part, and then it would end.
all right. So are you saying like chapter 1 italicized prologue dot 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 story starts, or the chapter actually
Yeah,
starts?
so it would be chapter 1. Technically it would be chapter 1 start,
Yeah.
but I'd have the italicized part, and then the page break, and then you're in present day. So I guess, would you technically call that a prologue within
in a way,
the
yeah,
chapter?
yeah. In a way, it would be. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the proper term would be. I feel like it wouldn't be called a prologue, but it kind of serves the same purpose if it's setting up the stage for what happens in that chapter. I would say so. It's basically
Because
synonymous.
I've had feedback before where they're like, maybe use a prologue instead of a page break, or try to have a hook within the first chapter, so you don't even need a page break, or just start with the action. And I was like, well, I tried all 3 of those ways, and I felt for like my novel anyway, the prologue helped the most, because
Yeah.
it was like 2 pages, I think, or
Yeah.
page and a half.
You're writing like a crime thriller, right? Or like a detective
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
I guess you don't have to like spoil anything, but what's the overall gist of the prologue that you have?
So the prologue introduces I guess the murderer, without naming, like, in his process of killing somebody.
Yeah.
and then what happens after the fact, and then it goes into the first chapter. I'm pretty sure, I think I'm going to publish it on my website to get people interested. And it also, I think, is going to help me keep the community writing, because people are going to be like, okay, this is either really good and I want to read more of it, or it sucks and start over.
Fair enough. So yeah, I guess you could. Here's a question. So let's say you put this prologue on your website, and the next several months go by, you write the whole novel, but throughout the time we kind of change bits and pieces to where the prologue is essentially maybe it's contradictory in some ways, or it's not necessarily fully correct. What would you do? I guess
I would probably keep fix what was wrong with it, but keep it, and then just say, okay, here's the critiqued. Like, this is just I don't want to say a rough draft, because I try to make sure that everything is pretty spot on when I publish my work on my website. So it's like, here's not the final cut, but a very raw, almost final cut of what I have written for my prologue. When I publish, when I just put that on my website, and then if it fits within my book the same way, then that's fine. And if not, then people will, I guess, understand. I don't know.
Kind of brings me to my next question of, like, as you're writing, like generally, I'm sure you've got a pretty detailed, maybe not detailed, but you have a pretty good idea of where you want your novel to go, and you have certain expectations. Now, along the way, like, would you prefer to stick with that original, with the original idea, or as time goes by, do you I guess, change certain aspects of the story or certain characters, or maybe add
So
in new characters.
I know we kind of discussed this when we were
Mhm.
talking about how we outlined, or if we used an outline to create our stories or whatever.
Yeah.
So I have a basic understanding of, like, I don't have a detail, but I have a sketch out of a crime scene, like a separate crime going on, but it revolves around the main one that's going, like, is happening, like the murder. And then it's kind of foggy, like I'm gonna go where my writing takes me. And then but I'm gonna make sure it like reverts back to the main focus, which is the murder or
Yeah. So you kind of have like,
murders in this case. And then I know how it's going to end. That's the sad part. Like, I have the beginning, and then like how I could write the last chapter and how it's going to end. It's the middle part that I
mhm,
tend to struggle with, which I feel like a lot of people do, because they have like the starting point, and then they're like, okay, this is how I want it to finish. Now you have to, quote unquote, draw the map to get everybody there, including yourself.
yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, I guess like I'm not super strict on how I like when I plan my stories. Like I kind of come up with like in the time, like I come up with the best idea, and then as time goes on, if I can think of a better ending or maybe even a better starting point, then I'll kind of like rewire some things and try to make it work. But I had a thought, but I completely forgot it.
Well, do you prefer having your endings just it just stops, or do you prefer to have like, or with a cliffhanger, or do you prefer to have meaning and that's it, no questions asked, this is how the story ends? I don't like, it's up to,
Mm,
it's like that's it, or it's up to interpretation.
I think it depends on a couple things. Like first, do I plan on continuing? Do I plan on making a sequel? And then second, what's the genre? Would a cliffhanger uh, be of any utility to the story in that genre? And I guess I think I had a third thing, but I forgot that too. Um, like for the Fairly Human book, I planned on as I was writing it, it was it took me a long time to write it, but in during that time period, I kept thinking of new sequel ideas and new areas to take the book. So by the time I finished it, like I had solid plans to carry it on. And so while I left it as a cliffhanger, the idea was, the story would continue directly from where I left off sometime soon. And um, it took me a while to follow up with that, but eventually I did. But that was the only time I ever actually did it. I used a cliffhanger. With my other two books, I I tried to leave on happy notes. Something my dad talked to me about, not about writing, but just about stories in general. He was telling me about how when he watches movies or watches TV shows, you know, he always he doesn't like it when the bad guy wins or when the good people lose at the end of the story or the movie. You know, like he likes like a good episode of Law and Order is when the bad guys go to jail and the good guys get a cup of coffee and praise from the people. And so it kind of got me thinking about like some stories absolutely have to be more realistic, and sometimes the bad guys do win. And I'm never going to shy away from that, but certain stories where I feel like um, that would some stories where I feel like that kind of ending would be detrimental. Like I won't do it. Like I'll just if I think that a positive, more uplifting end will be better for the overall story in the genre that it's in, then I'll do it. I'll go for it. Like the last couple books that I wrote, they have happy endings. They kind of have like you know uh not so happy beginnings, and then over the course of the book things get better. And there's hardships. There's always that one point where everything seems like it's all going to fall apart. Then they bounce back, and it's kind of more uplifting. Even the Fairly Human book I wrote, didn't have a sad ending necessarily, but there were definitely multiple parts in that book where the bad guys kind of, you know, they would kind of win because it's just we live in that kind of world, and so I feel like to ignore reality sometimes is a disservice. But it always depends on the context of the story itself for me.
I'm gonna bounce off of that last point because I know I have a couple that short stories that aren't like happy running through flowers,
Yeah,
endings or whatever. And I have people like, why are these so sad? Some of these are so sad. I'm like, because reality, it's not everything is not
mhm,
sunshine and rainbows.
yeah,
I have one short story it's sad, but the ending is uplifting. It's not perfect. It's not like, oh, we're gonna go, catch the leprechaun at the end of the rainbow and get his gold or
yeah.
whatever. But it's uplifting. There's up for interpretation, like how it's gonna go after for the main character. But then, and I have others, they're like, this is so sad. It's good, but why is it so sad?
Yeah, it's like it's especially now. One thing I thought about over the last 2 years since the Great Plague, washed across the planet, is how people like when there's so much like death and it's been a rough couple of years. So like I can understand some people not wanting to have um difficult stories or sad stories. They just want to escape to a world that's you know uh unicorns and rainbows and leprechauns. I understand that, but I think I don't know, I still think that having stories and books that portray you know bits of reality and stories that happen every day that might not be might have a sad ending, might be a sad story, might maybe it has a happy ending, but like those real genuine stories still need to be made. I feel like like with your stories, I think I know the one you're talking about. That's that's especially like that story. um you want to clarify what the story was, or
The one that's like uplifting
well,
at
the,
the
the one,
end.
yeah, it's
Okay, the one where it's about the little girl and finds a dog.
yeah.
Yeah, it's that one.
So do you want me to talk about it at all, like the
I,
details of it?
I, I could tell. You could talk about it. I can talk about it. Well, it'd be interesting to see your interpretation of it, actually, and
All
then
right,
I could give my take if you're spot on or not.
all right. So it's been a while since I've read it, and my memory is not what it used to be. But my memory of it is that it's this girl is going through a tough time, uh, obviously depressed, and uh, on what could seemingly be her last day, or close to the last day on Earth, she finds a dog that kind of lights up some kind of purpose in her that keeps her something that keep her going, I guess, to give her a purpose in life. And that and I think that's the general gist of it. It's I mean anything I missed.
Well,
I mean it's really short version of it too.
I mean, it's because it is short. I actually sat on that um, story idea for I think all throughout college because I just some one day I just thought about it because I was witnessing certain things and
Mm,
that's how I am. Like sometimes when I people watch or I happen to be driving by somebody, I think of something like what's going on in their life. And I'm like, okay, I could use this as a story. And then sometimes it's not always positive. So that, one time actually I was home for the summer and I witnessed or just saw somebody walking down the street with a dog. And I'm like, okay, you went to my high school. And so I took that little portrayal, like it's definitely completely off of what, actually the actual life of the person is. But I took that and then said, okay, she's being bullied at school. All she only likes to do is read. The only person that is really nice to her and is like a parental figure is the librarian. And then just kind of like, and I said, okay, what's kind of like unfortunate but true about high school students? They commit suicide because they're bullied. So you incorporated a little bit of that in there, and then realize, okay, there's a sad, lonely, abandoned dog behind a dumpster in an alleyway. And you're like, okay, I'm not the only one that's like this. There's a creature, it's not even have to be a human being. It's a creature that's, needs help. And then they meet, find each other happenstance because she's not looking for it. And then it just, that's how it ends. She finds purpose, and then it's up to whatever the reader feels to how it's going to react when she goes home and all this other stuff, because her home life isn't much better at school.
I feel like that story, like it's definitely relevant to high school, but especially over the last couple of years, it's relevant to all of civilization, really. People, like it's probably not the same from country to country or even state to state, but a lot of people have been more isolated than ever, probably, and it's difficult to get used to, especially considering how being only online or only on a computer, it's like you can interact with people, but it's not the same. Even this interaction through a Zoom call isn't the same as interacting in person, and humans are very social creatures, and when you take that away, it's easy for that sort of depression to build to form, and so I think that's why another reason why stories like that are still important in the dark times that we might be in right now, because it will allow people to say, hey, they can read it and think, like this is someone who's kind of like me. They're going through something similar to what I'm going to. They're on their own, isolated, lack of purpose. Maybe that's another thing, and so I think that's another reason why sometimes you have to have those difficult stories, and it's not. If you look at it at its whole, it's not really a sad story. It's a happy story that it ends on a positive note. It ends on a new beginning, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And then there was another one that was like happy, and then it turned out to be sad. I know you like that one too. It was the couple who found out about one of them got sick and was dying. Yeah. And then it's like, that's also, unfortunately, this is a retired couple that, just decided to live by a lake all year round, start life, after working, and then this is what happens. So it's like, that's everyday life too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It all comes back to not everything is frolicking through sunflowers or daisies. Unfortunately, that's how I look at it when I'm writing some stories, because I'm like, I can't make everything so happy and gushy, because it's not. You can have bits and pieces, but I feel like you lose touch with the reader too, because they're like, okay, this could be a cliche.
I would add too that some of the readers, like some of the people that go through those difficult situations, want to find a story that they can relate to in that way as well. So it allows them to kind of like for me, sometimes when I'll read a story or a book that might be dark or sad or depressing in some way, and especially when I'm in that kind of mindset, it allows you can kind of see your thoughts organized in a way. You can kind of see an explanation of what you might be going through. It might be somewhat different from what you're going through. It's not like exact one-to-one, but you can still have that relation to it, and it's a very personal thing. And I think to completely cut that off would be pretty bad. Not that anyone's really calling for that, but I think there is a sentiment of we need more happy stuff, more leprechauns.
Well, also, like, running back to your Law and Order example, your dad said he would get mad if the defendant would win, so he's pissed off, but then he's still going to tune in to next week's episode and watch and see if the good person wins. So if you could, I feel like it keeps the reader, in like this sense, the reader interested to see, okay, is this story going to be sad again, or is it going to be happy? Because if you're going to do sad, or like that's it, I feel like that you're going to lose touch with some of your writers and just have like readers, and then you're just going to have like one set of people who are just sad all the time, and they'll read those, but you're kind of losing touch with everybody else.
You definitely need that kind of that mix, that variety, I suppose. 'Cause some of I think I've got a pretty good variety. I would say I have mostly positive stories, or mostly positive books, I guess. But some of the stuff I'm working on now is kind of a turn in the other direction. So we'll see how that goes. But any more thoughts on that? We're getting close to the end of our time slot.
Um, I guess one last question is using and how hard is it for you to write an ending? Like, do you have to flesh it out, or do you just go with the flow? Like, if you're cranking out like 20 pages and you're close to being done, that's it, and then you rework it later.
So I generally, when I'm writing an ending, I usually know how I want it to go, and then it's kind of like how you described your method, where I have an idea of what I want, I work my way towards it, and then I'll just write it all out, you know, and basically I'll take whatever I had in mind and kind of attach it to the branches that have led there. I'll change things if I need to, and then just kind of fit them together. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that does. Yeah, it's kind of like drawing your map,
Mhm.
thing.
Like
Like I said before.
there's only one time I ever had to completely rewrite an ending because the ending it was bad. It was poor writing, I guess, or poor. I forget how to describe it. It was an ending that it was not real. I feel like it was kind of it just wasn't good. So I completely threw it out, and had to restructure it a bit, rewrite it a bit. But um, usually I just kind of follow that method though, just work towards it, and then I build it based off of what I've gotten so far.
Yeah, I know, like I said before, with my ending, I have a clear cut, like how I wanted to, like the last couple sentences to be like the feel to say, but then up to that point, which is I realize kind of bad in a way too, because you're like, okay, now I have to really focus in on how this last scene has to fit in with like the build up to it. So you could rewrite that build up like 7 different times to make
Yeah.
it fit. So you have to really be, I guess, flexible in a way. And I haven't gotten to that point yet, obviously, because I've only written 6 pages, maybe.
Yeah.
I have a long way to go.
Yeah, that build up is my second book. That build up failed to really reach the ending that I had been writing. So rather than rewrite the build up, I just rewrote the ending. And I think it was better altogether for that, because at the ending and then the build up that it required was definitely inferior to what I had produced up to that point. So that was also like a tip that one of my editors had given me. So whoever that editor is, I can't remember their name, but they probably saved that book. But
Too bad we couldn't give him a shout out. But
it was back in 2018, I want to say, maybe 2019. So it was a little while ago, back when I could afford to hire editors. Living at home was easy back then.
that's very fair.
But times have changed. Now I am my own editor, which probably not the best idea. You should always have multiple people doing your editing. And I preach it, but I don't practice it.
And that's also a what's the word that we talked about that in like our first or second episode too.
Mm.
That's a callback. That's what it is. Callback to a different episode.
Yeah, call back to all of our viewers from that episode, whichever one it was. Yeah, that's actually why I want to put more stuff online. Like I just put a short story on my website, and it's I don't know, it's not like a typical short story. It's just more of it's just a conversation, like a really short conversation. It's only 1,100 words, but it's kind of trying to flesh out an idea for a new book, and I'm gonna basically do that and then kind of throw that to my website to see how that goes. See if anyone reads it. I don't. I think when I look at statistics for my website, it'll show like, a certain amount of visits, but I always think it's just me checking it out just to see how it looks, because I like to go on it sometimes and just see how it is from a regular person's perspective outside of my website builder,
So
thing.
does your website builder have, and like Wix has its own app to like tell you that without having to visit how many times, like how many, like it shows you the analytics of it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go in and look every single time, like if someone's read it. So
Oh,
it will, and plus it Wix, the app tells me anytime anybody visits my website.
oh, yeah. I don't get a notification when people visit it. It's just when I go to the website builder, it'll
Okay,
show those statistics.
okay.
Uh, but I mean, the website is another thing I need to market more. Probably almost as much as any book, because if obviously I want people to read short stories, I got to show them where they can read it at. So
Well,
maybe
yeah, because this is news to me. I didn't know you wrote a short story and put it on your website.
I thought I told you yesterday.
No.
No, maybe not. All right, I just did it. It's actually technically it went live on my website. Well, today, but today's October 1st. It's probably going to be like late October when this video gets out. But yeah, it just went live on October 1st. So
Okay.
at the time of recording, basically. So if you want to check it out, I'll link it in the description down below. I'll also link Rue, your short story that we referenced earlier. Give them both a look, and then say what you like about it. Say what you think could use improvement. Constructive
Be on the
criticism
look,
is always welcome here.
and then be on the lookout. I'm probably going to post or publish my prologue, and I'll put that in the comments or in this episode too, especially because that was a very heavy topic today
Yeah.
that we
Oh yeah.
discussed on, which was good.
Yeah. True that.
And so appreciate you listening or watching, whatever
Yeah.
you are doing.
Or both. Hopefully you're listening and watching. I mean, if you're just watching with the audio muted, it's different. That's different.
I
But
was referencing the Spotify account, but we could go that route too.
well, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're watching on YouTube and not listening, is what I meant. Like you're just watching the video portion.
That would be different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a view, so I'm all for it, but that would be different.
True. True. Well, on that note, I guess it's time to close up shop. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Like I said, thanks for watching, listening, etc., etc. Check the links in the description for those stories. Also, follow us on the Twitter. Look us up on the YouTube. My sister's calling me for some reason. And yeah, check us out next time. We are dropping videos every Friday, 4:30 p.m. I think. Subject to change, but should be every Friday. Yeah, that's all I got. You want anything to add? Anything?
No, that was good. The link for our new Twitter will be in the description as well, because I might have butchered the Twitter handle at the beginning of the episode.
Hey, it's all right. We'll put it in there. It'll make it nice and easy. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the internet. Goodbye.